The sun bore down on the high desert plains of northern Arizona, casting long, shimmering waves of heat over the dusty land. The wind was dry and restless, stirring up trails of dust that danced like spirits across the rocky ground. Joshua Kincaid sat high in the saddle, his hat pulled low to shade his eyes, boots dusty from a long morning's ride. From this vantage, he could see the ribbon of silver that marked Willow Creek, a rare vein of water winding through the ochre landscape. Joshua was not a man given to superstition, but something about that afternoon made him uneasy. Maybe it was the way the cicadas went silent as he crested the ridge, or how the horses beneath him shifted nervously, ears flicking. He had seen enough hard years to know when something wasn't right. Down by the water, in the dappled shade of cottonwoods, he spotted movement. At first, he thought it might be a wild animal, a deer maybe come to drink. But as he dismounted and led his horse quietly down the slope, he realized it was a person. A woman collapsed in the reeds, half in the water. He moved fast. "Ma'am," he called, dropping the reins and splashing into the shallows. No response. Her dress was torn, the faded calico soaked through, clinging to her legs. Her hair was plastered to her face, and one arm was curled awkwardly beneath her. Joshua crouched beside her, turning her gently. She wasn't breathing. He pressed his fingers to her neck and found a faint, thready pulse. There was a gash above her eyebrow crusted with dirt and dried blood. Her skin was pale beneath the sunburn and grime. Joshua didn't ask himself why he just acted. He lifted her into his arms, carried her to the bank, and laid her on a flat stretch of sun-warmed rock. From his saddlebags, he pulled a canteen and poured a trickle of water onto a rag, wiping the worst of the dirt from her face. She stirred slightly. Her lips moved, but made no sound. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Just rest." He built a fire and boiled water, adding a pinch of dried willow bark. When she finally opened her eyes, it was twilight. She looked around wildly, trying to sit up. Joshua held her shoulder. "Easy now," he said. "You've been through hell," where her voice cracked. "Where am I?" "Near Willow Creek. My name's Joshua Kincaid. I found you passed out by the water." She blinked, trying to focus on his face. I ran," she whispered. "They were going to sell me." Joshua frowned. "Who?" "Mr. Durbin. The man who said he'd give me work. He kept me locked up. I escaped 2 nights ago. Been walking since." Her breath hitched. "I thought I'd die out here." Joshua didn't speak for a moment. He'd heard stories like this before, girls promised kitchen work only to be forced into something darker. He handed her a cup of the willow tea. "Drink slow," he said. "You're safe now." She drank, grimacing at the bitterness. "What's your name?" "Claire," she said. "Claire Morgan." He nodded. "Well, Miss Morgan, you'll stay at my place until you're strong enough to ride into town." Fear sparked in her eyes. "I'm not going back." He held up a hand. "No one's sending you anywhere. But if you want protection, legal protection, you'll need to speak with the sheriff. I know him. He's honest." Claire looked into the fire, her jaw tight. "I don't trust men in badges." Joshua didn't press her. They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky painted in purples and rose gold. The breeze cooled and night creatures began to stir in the brush. "You're not from around here," she said after a while. "No, Kansas originally. Came west after the war, built my ranch from the ground up. Got a wife." He hesitated. "Used to. She died 4 years ago. Fever." Claire didn't respond. The silence between them grew companionable, if still heavy. Joshua unrolled his spare bedroll and laid it near the fire, then walked a few paces away to give her space. In the morning, he found her sitting up staring out across the creek. Her hair had dried into waves, and though her face was still pale, she looked stronger. "Do you believe people can change?" she asked without turning. Joshua considered. "Only if they want to. What if they don't know how?" He crouched beside her. "Then someone's got to show 'em." She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her expression softened. They rode back to his ranch slowly. Claire's body was weak, but she insisted on trying. Joshua offered his mare the gentler of the two horses and rode alongside, ready to catch her if she slipped. The land opened up before them, rolling scrubland, thorny brush, the faint green of mesquite and juniper. A hawk circled high above, crying to the wind. The Kincaid Ranch came into view by midday, a modest wooden house with a tin roof, a barn in need of paint, a split-rail corral where two horses grazed. Smoke curled from the chimney. Claire stared at it. "Is this all yours?" she asked. "Every acre." She swung down from the horse and stumbled. Joshua caught her, still dizzy, just tired. Inside the house was clean but sparse. He fixed a simple stew and watched her eat like someone half-starved. He gave her space. Let her talk when she wanted or not. That first night, she slept in his late wife's room, the door left ajar. Days passed. Claire regained strength, helping with small chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, sweeping the porch. She was quiet but observant, and sometimes he caught her watching him as he worked. One morning, he found her reading a yellowed copy of Pilgrim's Progress by the fire. She looked up as he entered. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Joshua nodded, unsure how to respond. Something had shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but respect, trust. And just as the silence between them became comfortable, a shadow darkened the doorway. A rider dismounted outside. A man in a black coat and town boots. He knocked once, then entered. "You Joshua Kincaid?" the man asked. "That's right. I'm looking for a girl, Claire Morgan. She stole from my employer and ran off. There's a reward." Joshua stepped between the man and Claire, his eyes cold. "She's not going anywhere," he said. "And if your employer has a problem with that, he can take it up with the law." The man's hand drifted toward his coat, where a pistol hung heavy. But Joshua didn't flinch. He'd stared down worse men than this. "Leave," he said. The man hesitated, then spat on the porch and walked out. Joshua turned to Claire. Her hands were shaking. "He'll be back," she whispered. Joshua's jaw clenched. "Let him come. I ain't scared of cowards." And for the first time since they met, she smiled. By the time the sun rose over the mesa, casting long amber rays across the dusty horizon, Joshua Kincaid was already back in the saddle. The night hadn't given him much rest. After settling Claire into the guest room, her ankle splinted and wounds cleaned. His mind had spiraled endlessly through questions. Who was she truly? The creek had coughed her up like a secret, bruised and battered eyes full of fear and fire. She hadn't offered much, just a name and a broken tale of escape. But Joshua had seen enough pain in his life to recognize it in another. And something in Claire's voice, the grit beneath the surface, had stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. Joshua dismounted outside the stable, giving Dusty his mare a slow brush down. The day promised heat and maybe trouble. He didn't know which would come first. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Claire stood on the porch, dressed in one of Joshua's old flannel shirt sleeves rolled above her elbows. Her dark hair was damp from the basin out back. She looked steadier this morning, her movements cautious but less pained. "You're up early," Joshua said, tossing a pitchfork into the hay. "Didn't sleep much," she replied, folding her arms. "Your bed's too soft?" Joshua cracked a grin. Apologies. I'll try to rustle up some rocks next time. She almost smiled. Almost. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the wind whistling low through the cottonwoods. Then Claire stepped down onto the dirt, her bare feet light on the cool earth. "I owe you thanks," she said. "Most men would have left me there." Joshua wiped his hands on a rag. "Most men ain't me." Her gaze lingered on him for a second longer than comfort allowed, then shifted toward the barn. "You got a lot of land out here. Too much for one man. You always work it alone." Joshua shrugged. "Used to have help. Couple of hands drifted off after the drought last year. Can't pay much, but the work keeps me sane." Claire stepped closer, wincing slightly as she walked. "You said yesterday Juniper Ridge is the nearest town. 25 miles southeast. Rough trail, steep in places. Too rough for someone with a busted ankle." She hesitated. "How far's the sheriff?" Joshua's eyes narrowed. "You expectin' him?" "Not exactly," she said, but he caught the tension in her shoulders. "Just wondering how long until someone comes asking." Joshua didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he nodded toward the barn. "Come on. You can sit while I check the water troughs. Won't hurt to have company." They worked in quiet rhythm. Joshua moved through the morning routine, feeding chickens, mending fence posts, while Claire sat on an overturned crate, watching. Occasionally, she asked questions. About the ranch, about the town, but not about him. And he didn't ask about her past, though the weight of it hung in the air between them like a thunderhead. By noon, the temperature had climbed and the first beads of sweat rolled down Joshua's neck. He wiped his brow with a sleeve and led Claire back inside. He stirred a pot of beans on the stove while she cradled a cup of water in her hands. "You ever kill a man, Joshua?" she asked suddenly. He looked over his shoulder. "That's not your typical lunchtime conversation." She didn't smile. He turned back to the stove. "I fought in the war. Saw a lot of things I don't talk about. And yeah, I've killed men. Some in uniform, some not." Claire's voice dropped. "Did it ever get easier?" "No," he said after a pause. "But you learn to live with it, or it eats you alive." She nodded as if that made sense. "I ask because I think I might have killed one." Joshua turned. Her knuckles were white against the cup. She didn't look afraid. She looked resolved. "It was the night of the stagecoach ambush," she said. 3 days ago. 4 men came out of nowhere. One of them, he tried to take me. I had a pistol. I fired once, maybe twice. I ran and never looked back." Joshua's jaw clenched. "And now, someone's chasing you." "Probably. Men like that don't leave things unfinished." He exhaled slowly. "You still have the gun." She shook her head. "Lost it crossing the river." "That's where you found me." Joshua sat across from her, meeting her eyes. "You're safe here for now. But if they're coming, I need to know how many and what they're after." She looked down at her hands. They were after the coach's lockbox. The other passengers, they didn't survive. I don't think I was supposed to either. Before Joshua could reply, the sound of hooves cracked through the air. He moved fast, grabbing his rifle and moving to the window. Dust swirled along the road. A single rider. Fast. Claire limped beside him. "You know him?" Joshua's brow furrowed. "Deputy Wheeler, from Juniper Ridge." Joshua stepped outside, rifle lowered but visible. The rider slowed, tipping his hat. "Josh," he said, "heard you had a visitor." "Word travels fast. Faster than you think," Wheeler replied, dismounting. "We got reports of a survivor from the Black Hollow stage ambush. Your place matches the description of where she was headed." Joshua didn't flinch. "She's resting. Hurt pretty bad. She got a name." Claire Morgan Joshua said evenly. "She told me the same story you probably heard." Wheeler glanced toward the house, then back. Marshall wants her statement. Says she might be the only witness left. Joshua crossed his arms. She's not ready to ride. Then the marshal will wait. But don't let her disappear, Josh. If she's running from something, we need to know what. The deputy remounted and tipped his hat once more. You always did pick the complicated ones, he said with a wink before riding off. Inside, Claire was pacing, biting her lip. I don't want to bring trouble to your door, she said. It's already here, Joshua replied. But I don't scare easy. Outside, the wind began to shift. A storm was forming over the mesa, dragging clouds across the sun like a curtain. Claire looked toward the hills. They'll come, she whispered. They always do. Joshua set his rifle by the door. Let 'em come, he said. This time someone's ready. And for the first time in a long while, he meant it. By the following morning, thunderheads brewed on the horizon like smoke signals warning of trouble. Joshua stood at the fence line watching the sky go from gold to gray, one boot propped on the lowest rail. There hadn't been rain in weeks, but he knew the signs. Nature always sent her warnings ahead of time, clouds stacking like soldiers, the silence of birds, the smell of change in the dirt. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. Behind him, Claire Morgan limped toward the porch, still favoring her injured ankle, wrapped tightly in Joshua's spare linen strips. She held a cup of coffee in both hands, eyes rimmed in sleepless shadow. But her voice was steady. I saw a buzzard circling this morning, she said, not bothering with a greeting. Joshua turned slightly. Could have been after a coyote. Or it could be the same men who were after me. He didn't answer right away. He'd been having similar thoughts. The deputy's visit the day before had unsettled him, not because he didn't trust Wheeler, but because of how quickly word had spread. Outlaws had ears in every saloon from Juniper Ridge to Flagstaff. If even a whisper of Claire's survival had reached them, they'd come to silence it. He spat in the dirt and nodded toward the barn. You know how to shoot. Claire gave him a look. Does a prairie dog dig holes? Joshua half smiled. I keep a carbine in the cellar plus a couple of 6-shooters. We'll practice after breakfast. Claire looked past him toward the hills. You really think they'll come here? He followed her gaze. If they're smart, they won't. But men who kill unarmed passengers don't tend to think long term. They ate in silence, cornbread and molasses, dried apples on a chipped tin plate. Claire sat straighter today. Her fire was returning. After breakfast, they moved behind the barn. Joshua lined up tin cans on the fence post and handed her a revolver. She weighed it in her palm like a gambler appraising a loaded die. Reminds me of my father, she said, taking aim. Joshua glanced at her. He'd teach you to shoot. She nodded, eyes narrowed, and to run. He worked freight between Durango and Santa Fe. Said a woman's got to protect herself when no one else will. Claire squeezed the trigger. The first shot clipped a can and sent it spinning. The second sent another flying into the dust. Joshua raised his brows. Well, damn. I was better with a Henry rifle, she muttered, reloading smoothly. But this'll do. The wind began to rise, carrying the dry bite of distant rain. Joshua smelled creosote and tension in the air. Then came the sound. Faint at first, but unmistakable hooves. Joshua froze, scanning the ridge. Get inside, he said, low and urgent. Claire didn't argue. She limped fast toward the back door while Joshua ducked into the barn and grabbed his rifle. He eased out and crouched behind a hay bale, eyes fixed on the horizon. 2 riders came into view along the high trail. One wore a brown hat with a braided leather band. The other had a rifle slung lazily across his chest. Both rode like men who knew their way around ambushes. Joshua cursed under his breath. They weren't townsfolk. They weren't passing through. They were hunting. He waited still as stone until they rode within 50 yards. Then he stood. "Morning, gents," he called, rifle across his chest. The men slowed. The one with the rifle gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You Joshua Kincaid?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." The man in the brown hat tipped it back. "Name's Roy Vance. This here's Miles. We're looking for a woman." Joshua's eyes didn't blink. Plenty of women in Juniper Ridge. This one's different. Dark hair, small limps a little. She was on that stagecoach from Black Hollow. Survivor. Joshua spat. Heard nobody made it out. Roy's eyes narrowed. "That's so." Joshua shrugged. "That's what I heard." A long pause stretched between them. The wind kicked up a small swirl of dust between the horses. Roy leaned forward. "Mind if we look around?" Joshua's voice dropped. "I do, actually." Roy's smile vanished. "You helping her rancher?" "Not unless you count teaching chickens to lay," Joshua said coolly. Miles shifted in his saddle, his fingers brushing his rifle. Joshua stepped forward, rifle now raised. "This land's mine. You ride one step closer, I'll put a hole in your leg and let the buzzards do the rest." Roy and Miles exchanged a look. Joshua could tell they were weighing their options. 2 against 1 wasn't bad odds until you remembered that men like Joshua didn't bluff. Finally, Roy nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll be back." Joshua's voice stayed low. "Bring more men and I'll dig twice the graves." The 2 men turned and rode off, but not in a hurry. They weren't done, just buying time. Joshua stood in the dust, watching them until they vanished beyond the ridge. Only then did he exhale. Inside the house, Claire was already gathering supplies, spare bullets, water flasks, bandages. "I saw the one with the rifle," she said. "That's Miles Hart. He was with the ambushers. I remember his eyes." Joshua checked the windows. "They'll come back and not alone." Claire sat heavily on the chair. "We can't stay here, can we?" "No," he said, voice tight, "but we won't run either." He paced once across the room, then stopped. "There's a canyon to the west, narrow and full of switchbacks. I used to hide cattle there during raids. If we get there by dusk, we can set a trap." Claire nodded. "What do you need me to do?" He looked at her surprised. She met his gaze squarely. "I didn't come this far to die in someone else's dust," she said. A grin tugged at the corner of Joshua's mouth. "Good, because we're about to make this personal." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing packing food ammunition and a saddlebag of dynamite sticks Joshua had stashed in the tool shed years ago during the railroad dispute. Claire's limp slowed them, but she insisted on carrying her share. By sundown, they reached the canyon's mouth. It cut through the mesa like a knife wound, sharp, hidden, deadly. Joshua handed Claire the rifle. "I'll climb the north ridge and keep lookout. You stay here. If you see anyone who ain't me, shoot first, ask later." Claire chambered around. "I don't plan on asking." Joshua climbed the ridge with the sure-footedness of someone who'd walked the land since boyhood. He settled behind a rock ledge and waited. Darkness fell. So did the silence. Only the sound of wind scraping the canyon walls and distant coyote howls filled the night. Then, close to midnight, the sound returned, hooves again. Slower this time. Careful. More than 2, maybe 4, maybe 6. They had come. Joshua's eyes narrowed. "Let's see if you boys like surprises," he whispered. He lit the first fuse, and everything changed. The late afternoon sun burned low on the western ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. Joshua Kincaid crouched beneath the outcrop above Dry Creek, scanning the horizon with squinted eyes. Every instinct in his body was screaming that something was wrong. The air smelled of pine and dust, but underneath that, something darker. Smoke. Claire Morgan knelt beside him, brushing strands of auburn hair from her face. "You feel it, too," she said quietly. He nodded. "Someone's trying to drive us out, or scare us into running." That morning, they discovered the fence line cut near the southern edge of the ranch. One of Joshua's steers lay dead poisoned, and now, with sunset painting the landscape in amber and blood, the faint tendrils of smoke rising in the distance were unmistakable. It wasn't wildfire, it was controlled, deliberate. "They're burning the grazing land," Claire said, voice tight. Joshua's jaw clenched. Or worse, they could be setting a trap. Fire in front, gunmen behind. Claire rested her hand briefly on his shoulder. "What do we do?" Joshua stood brushing the dust from his coat. "We go back to the homestead. Get ready." They rode hard and silent back to the ranch, the sound of hooves pounding against the cracked soil. When they arrived, Samuel, the aging ranch hand who'd been with Joshua since his father's days, was waiting at the gate. "Thought I saw smoke," Samuel muttered, holding a battered rifle. "I locked the barn and pulled the herd up into the north pasture." "Good," Joshua said. "Keep the water troughs full. If they come with fire, we'll need to hold the line." Inside the main house, Joshua opened the locked cabinet behind the hearth and began laying out the old weapons, 2 rifles, a shotgun, and the revolver that had belonged to his brother. Claire watched him with calm precision. "We should check the ridgeline above the east field. If they're coming, that's where they'll start." "You planning to do the scouting?" Joshua asked. "I was a rancher's daughter before I was a teacher," she said. "I know how to move quiet, and I can shoot straight." He met her eyes and saw the truth in them. This wasn't the timid woman who'd collapsed at his doorstep days ago. This was someone who'd weathered storms before grief, fear, and justice, and she wasn't about to run. Joshua handed her the revolver. 2 pulls, left, 1 right. "It'll shoot true if you do." Claire gave a nod and holstered the weapon. They split up. Joshua took the west slope, while Claire moved toward the east. The land was familiar, but in the dimming light, every bush seemed to shift every tree a potential ambush. Joshua crouched behind a rock formation overlooking the dry riverbed and waited. Half an hour passed, then he saw it. 3 men on horseback rode along the canyon trail, torches in hand. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered rider in a black duster, looked up toward the ridge and pointed. The others followed his gesture. Joshua could see they were heading toward the north pasture, toward the livestock. He didn't hesitate. With a sharp whistle and a wave, he signaled toward the east ridge toward Claire's position. She saw him. A flash of movement and a glint of metal told him she was there, and she'd seen the riders too. Joshua crept along the rocky ledge, keeping low. His boots scuffed against the shale, and he froze, heart pounding. One of the riders paused, scanning the slope, but then he moved on unaware. Joshua took a deep breath and kept going, circling back to regroup with Claire. They met behind a stand of juniper trees as dusk swallowed the land. 3 men, she whispered. One of them I recognized. Miles Becker used to work for the land office. Now he's riding with Rayner's men. Rayner's behind this, Joshua said darkly. He's buying out all the ranches east of the tracks, using fire threats and bribes to scare people off. He wants this land, Claire said. Yours. It's the last piece that links the grazing route to the railhead. Joshua nodded grimly. That's why he wanted me gone. Why he let that marshal chase me halfway through Arizona. He needs me out of the way, dead or gone. Claire touched his arm. Then we don't run. We make this place too costly to take. By full dark, they had a plan. Samuel lit lanterns around the homestead, but carefully, none too bright. They left the barn doors open, just enough to look vulnerable, and scattered ash and manure over the path leading up from the south trail. Claire poured water along the fences, soaking the base to slow any flame, and then they waited. The night was thick and quiet. Crickets chirped, owls hooted somewhere in the pine beyond, but otherwise nothing, until a horse neighed loud and frightened. Joshua raised the rifle. "They're coming." From the ridge, a flaming bottle arced through the air and shattered against the barn roof. Fire licked upward in a sudden roar. Claire grabbed the bucket line. "Don't waste it," Joshua shouted. "Let it burn a bit. They'll come in close to finish it." It worked. 3 riders crept in from the south gate, torchlight glinting off their revolvers. They rode slow, assuming the place had been caught by surprise. Then Claire moved. From behind a water trough, she stood and fired once, hitting the lead rider's shoulder. He tumbled from the saddle with a curse. The other 2 spurred their horses and ran directly into Joshua's trap. A tripwire strung between 2 posts sent one horse sprawling. The last rider drew a gun, but Joshua's rifle cracked and the torch fell from his hand as he slumped forward. Flames danced high into the sky as the barn's roof collapsed, but the livestock was already safe. The trap had worked. The riders scattered. The attack was over. Later that night, Claire stood beside Joshua, watching the embers of the barn die down. Her face was streaked with ash, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "You sure know how to make a first impression," she said. Joshua smiled wryly. "Only the best for guests." "Thank you," she said softly, "for fighting, for staying." He looked out over the scorched fields. "I've run before. Not this time." From the ridge, the moon rose over the blackened valley, and despite the smoke and ash, the ranch still stood, for now. But Joshua knew this was just the beginning. The day began with a pale, uncertain sky over the ranch. Dawn light, tenuous and gray, hinted at smoke still drifting from the charred timbers of Joshua's barn. The structure gutted by fire the night before was little more than a skeletal frame. Charred beams jutted like broken bones into the hazy air, while ash-coated soil fanned out into the surrounding paddocks. Joshua Kincaid stood at the edge of the ruin, the last embers flickering among the blackened floorboards. He held a battered tin mug in both hands, the early coffee too weak to mask the bitterness of loss. Across from him, Claire Morgan approached on quiet boots, bringing the second mug. Their palms brushed for a moment as they exchanged coffee and unspoken solidarity in the wreckage. "You didn't sleep?" she asked, voice soft with concern. He shook his head. "Neither did the land." He replied, his voice low. "It sounds hollow in the silence." Claire's gaze drifted over the ruins. Memories of the barn's daily rhythms, the clatter of feed bags, the anticipation of hay hovered in the morning air and decayed under the weight of burned memories. "We'll rebuild," she said, though even she didn't seem fully convinced. "It's not too late." Joshua sighed, tracing char marks on his cup. "It's the message more than the fire. Something dark enough to burn a life's work off the map." A distant call from the corral broke the quiet. Samuel Ruger, their trusted hand, emerged covered in dust and sweat. He halted at the scene, having seen the damage himself. When he judged Claire's eyes, he spoke low. The herds spooked, but none fled. Running Bear and Swift Arrow pulled the east fence back upright and patched the line before dawn. Joshua nodded. "Good. Those men are earning more than value. They're saving this place." Claire touched his arm. "What now?" she asked. "Rainer's off with the night, but morning doesn't bring peace." He stared at the twisted remains of barn joists. "We send a message back," he said with quiet determination. By midday, Joshua, Claire, and Swift Arrow rode toward Red Hollow, their demeanor deliberate. dust clouds rose from their horses' hooves, merging with the tumbleweed's lazy spiral. Joshua's chest tightened, not from exertion, but because he knew what awaited them in town: stares, gossip, the silent judgment of neighbors. Red Hollow lay at the crossroads of two dusty trails coursing through red rock mesas. The town's heart was Hargrave's General Store, a wood-frame building of clapboard and windows caked in dust. As they rode up, townsfolk paused. Hushed conversations fluttered to murmurs. They dismounted before the store. Claire's dark braid caught the breeze, and Swift Arrow's presence exuded calm authority. Joshua's jaw stiffened as he stepped in, clearing the threshold beneath the bell. Otis Hargrave, large-shouldered and harried, looked up from stacking flour sacks. When recognition flickered in his eyes, a wave of murmured surprise rolled among the gathered townsmen. Even flies paused above a jar of pickles. "Joshua Kincaid," Otis said, voice gravelly. "Thought your mountain ranch buried you." "I'm afraid not," Joshua said, voice steady as steel. "But the fire behind me might do a better job than fate." Silence pressed in the room, broken only by the creak of boards and the occasional cough. A few men stiffened by flour barrels. Some spat tobacco juice on the floor. Otis looked between Joshua and Swift Arrow. Firebug drunk hand, or Apache lightning strike. He nodded toward the stoic native man. Joshua didn't flinch. Rayner's men. He paused. "He sent them last night to burn my barn, stampede my cattle. Wanted it to look like an accident." A hush fell. Murmurs grew. Joshua's eyes searched the crowd. "I've got nothing to hide. There were witnesses, 2 ranch hands, a half-dead kid by the fence, and the Apache men who pulled our fence line before dawn. Name them or name it, bias your call." Behind the counter, Otis's jaw clenched. Whispers rose hell's fire. Rayner's scared of him. Sheriff Clay Hollis leaned casually against the wall, chewing a matchstick. He made no move toward a badge or chair. Joshua looking for sympathy. Joshua leveled his gaze. Looking for justice. And maybe, for you, Sheriff, he nodded at Clay Hollis to choose a side. Hollis bristled. "Don't start a war you can't finish." Joshua leaned in. "War's already come. I'm just giving you a chance to stand where history will remember." The store fell quiet, save for a scratch of a poker game in the corner and the shuffling of boots. Otis rubbed a hand over his mustache. "We'll see," he muttered. "Talking ain't shooting. Do you expect miracles?" Joshua's lips curled. "No, just courage." He headed toward the door, Claire and Swift Arrow following. As he left, he heard the townsman speaking low. He's not bluffing. Apache at his side. Rayner pushed too far. They rode back in silence. Heat shimmered off the trail as they passed tumbleweed blanketing the fences. Claire's fingers grazed Joshua's wrist. "You did what you said," she said softly. Truth or not, they heard. He exhaled slowly. They heard. At the ranch gate, Thomas Redhawk awaited calm as autumn wind, his posture unreadable, his dark eyes measuring land and man. "You made noise," he said quietly. "I had to," Joshua replied. "Rayner needed to know this is not being buried." Thomas studied the smoke rising above the ruin. "He knows. He chooses to walk the line." Claire caught Joshua's gaze. "What's next?" Thomas turned to her. "He'll respond, not with words." His tone was worn with certainty. "He'll come with fire and lead. He doesn't lose land, not to frontier idealism." Joshua set his jaw. "Then we draw a line ourselves." Dusk settled as planning began. Moving around a travel-worn map sprawled on the table, they traced strategic positions, rooftops of the creek ridge marked with stone barricades, livestock pens to be reinforced with timed loaded rails. Claire and Samuel would take the south flank, providing flank fire. Swift Arrow and Running Bear would guard the animals and flank the east slope. Joshua would be center where branches could be felled to restrict approach. Thomas added, Running Bear's tracking senses can warn of movement before footsteps land. Swift Arrow's marksmanship can drop a man at 300 yards. We'll coordinate. Joseph Redhawk shuffled in, leaning on his cane. He placed a hand upon Joshua's shoulder, his gaze calm but firm. You're building more than a defense. You're building a wall of people. Joshua nodded. This isn't just about land anymore. He paused, looking at Claire, at Thomas, at his makeshift allies. It's about dignity. Joseph smiled a deep rattle of acceptance. Then you'll find true safety. Claire stepped closer. Then we stand, come hell or high water. Joshua turned to her, softening. As one. Outside, the wind rose as night fell. Flames danced in the distance, campfires making halos of tinted orange. Somewhere on that ridge, Rayner's men prepared. And in that moment, Joshua realized that rebuilding the barn was a small victory. The real work was behind them in the thin lines drawn between man and land justice and survival. The day had aged into amber light by the time Adam McAllister finished hauling water from the creek to the shelter the Apache men had fashioned for Chief Alon. The old man's breathing had stabilized under Dr. Hewitt's care, and though his body was still frail, his mind seemed sharp eyes tracking the young warriors who moved like shadows around the property. For a rancher used to solitude, the quiet, watchful presence of the Apache had become both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Swift Wind and Bear Claw. Thomas Eland's 2 appointed guardians had made themselves indispensable in the 3 days since the doctor's visit. Swift Wind repaired the broken east corral gate before Adam even noticed it had been damaged. Bear Claw brought in a stray calf from the canyon ridge using nothing but a low whistle and a coil of rope. They worked without comment, neither asking nor offering help unless it was needed. There was dignity in their silence, and an unspoken pact was forming between them and Adam, a sort of mutual tolerance rooted in necessity. That evening, Adam stood by the fence that overlooked the mesa, the horizon a watercolor of orange and violet. A few stars blinked to life, timid at first, before taking their place in the darkening sky. His boots scraped dry earth as he leaned against the split rail post, hat tipped back, cigar glowing softly at the edge of his mouth. Inside the tent, Chief Elon murmured in his native tongue. Bear Claw sat cross-legged beside him, nodding as if absorbing wisdom passed down through generations. Adam could only catch fragments when the elder spoke in English words like mountains, ancestors, and return. It was clear Elon wasn't just recuperating. He was reconnecting as if the land itself was mending something deeper than broken ribs. The stillness shattered when Swift Wind crested the ridge at a gallop, his horse kicking dust as he rode fast and low. He didn't shout. Apache scouts didn't need to. But the urgency in his posture was clear. Adam dropped the cigar and strode forward. What is it? Swift Wind dismounted with practiced ease, pointing toward the southern trail. Riders. Many. Armed. Adam's breath caught. Trouble? Maybe, the scout replied. They ride hard, but not wild. Military formation. Could be Thomas. Could be others. He didn't need to say more. Adam's mind reeled. If it was Thomas Eland returning to check on his father, the camp needed to be ready. If it wasn't, the presence of an injured Apache elder on a white man's land might invite the kind of scrutiny that didn't end well for anyone. Help me move the dock supplies inside, Adam ordered, and water the horses. If we have visitors, they'll want to see calm. Swift Wind gave a single nod and disappeared around the barn. 15 minutes later, the thunder of hooves vibrated through the dirt. Adam stepped forward as 7 riders appeared over the horizon, silhouetted by the last of the sun's fire. The led horse carried a man Adam had never met but recognized instantly. Thomas Elin Apache, war chief and diplomat, a man of contradictions. Thomas wore a deerskin vest over a blue military-style shirt, dark hair braided tight, and eyes hard as polished flint. The other warriors flanked him like sentinels, their faces set in stone. Adam raised a hand in greeting. "Evening, Chief Elin." Thomas dismounted, eyes flicking past Adam toward the tent. "My father. He lives. Hurt, but he lives," Adam said. Thomas didn't reply. He stalked past him and ducked into the tent, emerging moments later with his jaw tight and eyes heavy. Bear Claw followed, giving Adam a brief nod. "He needs time," Thomas said finally. "You have done what many would not." "I wasn't aiming for heroism," Adam replied. "Man needed water and help." Thomas studied him for a moment as if weighing not just his words, but his soul. "Still, you chose right." The rest of the evening passed in silence, broken only by the sounds of horses being unsaddled and fires lit. The Apache warriors moved through Adam's land like they belonged to it, and perhaps they did more than he ever had. Later, as they sat by the fire, Thomas spoke. "My father came here not by chance. This land, your land, was once a place of treaty, before your people claimed title to it." Adam nodded slowly. He mentioned his grandfather hunted here. His grandfather and mine, Thomas confirmed. There is memory in soil. Yours came with deeds. Ours came with bones. Adam turned his eyes to the fire, unsure what to say. The flames threw dancing shadows across their faces, making them look like phantoms of a forgotten war. "Do you believe men can change?" Adam asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. "Men, no. But moments can. One choice can become a different future. You made such a choice. Others wouldn't see it that way." Thomas smirked. "Then perhaps they need their own moment." Silence fell again, but it was less tense this time. Something unspoken had shifted. The man Thomas had expected to find a hostile rancher with a grudge had instead given his father shade water and dignity, but peace is rarely free. As midnight neared, Bear Claw approached with news a telegraph rider had passed through the northern trail and stopped by one of the Apache scouts. Word was spreading an Apache elder injured on white man's land, military interest stirring from Fort Sumter. Adam swore under his breath. "What now?" Thomas stood. "Now we prepare. If soldiers come, they must find unity, not division. You think that'll matter?" Thomas's eyes glinted. "If it doesn't, then we are already at war." A quiet settled in Adam's chest, not of fear, but of reckoning. He'd crossed a line, chosen humanity over heritage. Whatever came next, he would not face it with a rifle alone. He would face it as a man who had made a different choice and would make it again. The red blaze of evening spread over the sky like wildfire as Adam McAllister stood outside his bunkhouse, his hat low over his brow and his eyes on the trail to the east. For the past 3 weeks, the rhythms of life at his ranch had changed. What was once a solitary frontier operation had become something far more complicated and far more human. The Apache elder Elin was recovering steadily under the watchful care of Swift Wind and Gray Fox, 2 young warriors who had proven themselves to be more than capable hands. They'd not only tended to Alon's injuries, but they'd also repaired fences, assisted in rounding up strays, and even helped birth a calf in the middle of a midnight thunderstorm. Adam never thought he'd see the day when he'd be shoulder to shoulder with Apache warriors, laughing beneath the stars and sharing cornbread over a crackling fire. But not everyone saw it that way. Today, word had come by way of a traveling peddler talking town was turning ugly. Folks at the saloon had started asking questions, rumors were flying faster than prairie wind, and someone had even gone so far as to suggest Adam was harboring a war chief and plotting with the Indians. The tension that Adam had tried to ignore was becoming a storm on the horizon, and that horizon now held dust not the kind that rose from cattle, but from riders. Adam shifted his stance and whistled low. Swift wind emerged from the barn bow in hand, a frown creasing his sharp features. How many, he asked. Can't say yet, but it's more than 2. And they're not riding friendly, Adam muttered. By the time the riders crested the hill, Adam counted 6 men, all armed, their silhouettes sharp against the dying light. At their head rode a thick-shouldered man in a tan coat and bowler hat. It took Adam only a heartbeat to recognize Sheriff Raymond Doyle. "Evening, McAllister," the sheriff called out, voice carrying over the dusty wind. "Mind if we have a word?" Adam stepped forward, one hand resting near the revolver at his belt, though he made no move to draw it. "Evening, Sheriff. Didn't expect company. We heard some concerns," Doyle said, swinging down from his saddle. "Concerns about Apache war parties being seen on private land. Thought I'd come see for myself." The rest of the posse, dismounted, hands twitching near gun holsters, eyes roving over the yard where a thin line of smoke rose from the cook fire. Gray Fox stepped silently into view beside the bunkhouse, arms folded. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't have to. His calm alone was enough to unnerve a man. Adam kept his voice level. "You're on my land, Sheriff. You want to accuse me of something, go ahead and say it." Raymond Doyle tilted his head, studying Adam like a rattler sizing up its strike. "I'm hearing you've got an old Apache chief holed up here. That true?" Adam nodded. "His name's Elon. He was injured. He's recovering. That's all. He trespassed. Sat by a creek, got hurt. I helped him," Adam replied flatly. "And now you've got 2 Apache warriors staying on your land, too." "3," said a voice from the porch. All eyes turned as Thomas Elon stepped forward, his father's cane in one hand. He was dressed plainly, a buckskin shirt and worn trousers, but he walked with the presence of someone carved from granite and fire. The setting sun lit his features like a war painting, casting long shadows across his angular face. Raymond Doyle took an involuntary step back. "I am Thomas Elon," the warrior said, "leader of the Chiricahua who remain. The man you fear is my father, who would rather die in peace than fight another war. And the man beside you," he pointed to Adam, "offered him shelter when most would have turned him away." "Be that as it may," Doyle said, visibly rattled, "you're not exactly welcome here. The townsfolk don't own this land," Adam cut in, stepping between the sheriff and Thomas. "I do, and I say who stays." A silence fell. One of the posse men fingered his rifle. Another shifted nervously, eyeing Gray Fox, who hadn't moved. Doyle cleared his throat. "There's going to be consequences for this McAllister. The territorial office will hear about it. You could be seen as aiding hostiles. Then let them hear it," Adam replied. "Let them come ride through my gates and see for themselves. Because what they'll find is a man healing 2 hands earning their keep, and no trouble unless trouble comes knocking." Thomas said quietly, "We do not seek war, Sheriff, but we do not flee from it either." Doyle's jaw tightened. "Just don't let this become something it doesn't need to be." He turned to his men. "Mount up." The sheriff swung back into the saddle, gave Adam a long, unreadable look, and then rode out the way he came, dust trailing behind him like a veil of warning. When they were gone, Adam let out a slow breath. "That was close," Gray Fox muttered. "It's going to get closer," Thomas said. "They'll come again, with more questions, with papers, maybe even soldiers." "I figured," Adam said, brushing the dust from his coat. "But they're not going to find any reason to take this land of your father while I've still got 2 feet on it." The Apache warrior looked at him for a long moment. "You know you're putting yourself in danger." "Yeah," Adam said, "but this land was never just mine. Your father reminded me of that. His people drank from the creek long before my folks laid fence here. Maybe it's time someone remembered." Thomas nodded slowly. "You may be a fool, McAllister. Most good men are." That night, the fire burned brighter. Elan sat propped against a hay bale, sipping broth from a tin cup, his color returning. Adam played a quiet tune on his harmonica, the notes curling like wood smoke into the desert sky. They said nothing of the visit of the looming threat. But all of them knew something was coming, and when it did, they'd meet it not as strangers, not as enemies, but as men who had already chosen where they stood. The days that followed passed like horses on a slow drive, steady tense, and never far from breaking into a gallop. Adam McAllister woke each morning with the same question on his mind: would today be the day they come back? But the riders from town didn't return, not yet. The sheriff's warning still hung in the air like smoke that hadn't cleared. Instead, what came were whispers. First, it was a letter brought by a boy from the stagecoach station. A note from the Territorial Land Office requesting that Adam report for inquiry about his association with known Apache leadership. Then came visits men from neighboring ranches, friends of friends, men who didn't speak harshly but asked loaded questions with eyes sharp as barbed wire. And through it all, Adam stood firm. He didn't ride to town. He didn't answer the letter. He worked his cattle-shared meals with Swiftwind and Gray Fox, and each evening he sat with the elder Elon under the cottonwood trees as the old man recovered his strength. The Apache had built a small medicine shelter using woven reeds, and smoke from sacred herbs often drifted through the yard, mixing with the scent of coffee and horses. One night, as the moon spilled silver light across the prairie, Elon spoke with more clarity than he had in weeks. "My time is nearly returned," he said in slow-accented English. "But your time is just beginning." Adam looked over at the man whose presence had changed everything. "You mean trouble's still coming?" "I mean the wind is changing. It always does. But now, you've planted something." Thomas Elon stepped from the shadow's arms folded across his chest. "He means the alliance, the one you didn't ask for but still chose." Adam nodded. "I don't know if it's an alliance or just a strange friendship built on coincidence." "Friendship is the first kind of alliance," Thomas said. "The rarest kind." The next morning, dust clouds rose again on the horizon, but this time not from lawmen or posse. It was a single-wagon white canvas stretched over iron ribs bouncing along the trail like a question seeking an answer. Adam saddled his horse and rode to meet it. The man driving the wagon wore a stiff brown coat and wire spectacles. He reined in the team with the practiced grip of a bureaucrat and dismounted stiffly. "Mr. McAllister," he called. "That's me, Jeremiah Cole, Deputy Surveyor, Territorial Office. I've been sent to investigate allegations regarding unlawful cohabitation with indigenous persons on claimed private land." Adam raised a brow. "That's quite a phrase." "I didn't write it." The surveyor looked around, noting the Apache shelter, the warriors nearby mending a fence, and Elan resting beneath the tree. "I see the allegations were not exaggerated." "They weren't meant to be," Adam said. "But maybe they were misunderstood." Jeremiah Cole pulled out a pad, began scribbling notes. "Have any claims been made by the Chiricahua for this land?" "No," said a voice behind them. Thomas Elon walked up calm and steady. "We do not claim what cannot be owned, but this land is sacred to us. It was once hunting ground long before ink touched paper." The bureaucrat blinked. "You speak excellent English." Thomas smiled faintly. "So I've been told." Cole cleared his throat. "This may become a matter for arbitration." "Then arbitrate it," Adam said. "I'll speak before any judge. So will Thomas. And if they're worth their badge, they'll see this isn't about ownership, it's about honor." The surveyor adjusted his spectacles, uncomfortable. "Well, I will make my report, but I advise caution. You're drawing attention from people whose hands rest heavily on the scales." He rode off before noon. That night, as they gathered by the fire, Elon stirred from his rest and sat up straighter than he had in weeks. "I dreamed of the river," he said, voice raspy, "and of men on both sides laying stones, building a bridge." No one spoke for a long time. Then softly, Thomas said, "We'll need more than stones." Adam threw another log on the fire. "We've got time, and 2 hands each." 3 weeks later, the ruling came down from the land office. No action would be taken against Adam McAllister. It was phrased carefully, of course, insufficient grounds for eviction. Individual rights, maintained cooperation with native persons encouraged in good faith. But the message was clear. The alliance hadn't been condemned. And in the town of Red River Crossing, the whispers changed tone. People came by the ranch, curious now, not angry. The blacksmith brought a horse with a cracked hoof. The widow, Avery, sent her son for work. And one of the saloon barkeeps even asked Gray Fox to track a stolen mule, which he did in under an hour. Bit by bit, the air changed. So did the men. Elon returned to his people before the first snow stronger than ever. He placed his hand on Adam's chest before he left. "You carry a fire that does not burn." And then he was gone into the trees and the legend. Thomas remained behind for a few days more. On the final morning, as he packed his horse, he turned to Adam. "I don't make many promises," he said. Adam grinned. "Neither do I. But if you ever need me, not just for cattle or politics, but for your life, I'll come." Adam extended a hand. "Then I'll make one too. If your people ever need a white man to speak truth in a room of liars, I'll be that man." They shook on it, not just a deal, but a covenant. And as Thomas rode into the rising sun, Adam turned back toward his ranch and toward the future. That spring, new grass pushed up through old soil. A small lean-to became a trading post. Apache herbs and beadwork were sold alongside cured jerky and rope. A new herd of horses, crossbred from McAllister stock and tribal stallions, grazed freely on both sides of the creek. And in the evenings, when the sun laid gold across the hills, Adam would sit on the porch, watching the land he no longer believed was just his. Swift wind rode by, sometimes checking the line fences. Gray Fox visited with his young nephew, eager to learn English and ropes. The fire always stayed lit for them. One evening, as the wind rustled the cottonwoods, Adam sat beside the old harmonica he rarely played anymore. He looked out at the land and smiled. Because the war never came. The partnership held. And what started as a confrontation by the creek had become something far more rare. A beginning.